gold, blood, prayer. Three things that ruled the medieval world, and sometimes they were the same thing. In the Middle Ages, money wasn't just wealth, it was survival, sin, and salvation tangled together. The king's coffers overflowed while peasants starved in silence. Priests sold forgiveness like merchants sold spices, and men who bled for their lords dreamed that one day their hands would touch the same gold they died for. But no one was ever truly innocent of greed. Even monks counted coins by candlelight. Even knights gambled away their honor for ransom. Every coin carried a curse, a piece of someone's hunger, someone's blood, someone's soul. Tonight, we're not telling a story of heroes or saints. We're uncovering how people clawed their way to fortune in a world where faith had a price and death had a fee. These were the dark ways to get rich in the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages were built on order, or at least the illusion of it. Everyone had their place. The king ruled, the nobles fought, the church prayed, the peasants worked, and gold flowed upward like blood to the heart of the empire. For most, destiny was a locked door. If you were born poor, you'd die poor. But in a world where war never slept and God's favor could be bought, there were cracks in the system, small, dangerous cracks through which a clever or desperate soul could crawl toward power. Some found fortune through war, trading their lives for silver and scars. Others sold faith, hope, and even lies, turning salvation into business. A few became merchants, gamblers, and bankers of sin, inventing ways to profit from hunger, fear, and death itself. What you're about to see is not the Middle Ages you learned in school. This is the raw, unfiltered truth of a world where the road to wealth was paved with bones. If you love exploring the madness, mystery, and brutal genius of the medieval world, hit the like button, subscribe to Medieval Crazy History, and tell us in the comments which country or city you're watching from. Now, let's open the gates to a time where gold ruled all, and nothing came without a cost. In the medieval world, the crown was not just a symbol of power, it was a vault. To be a king was to own everything that breathed under your banner: the soil, the crops, the people, their labor, their faith. And from each of them, gold flowed like blood through invisible veins toward the throne. But kingdoms were fragile things. Gold had to be taken, not merely kept. Wars were not only about honor, they were economic engines. A battle could ruin a nation or make it rich for generations. For every sword raised in the name of God or glory, there was a merchant counting profits, a treasurer waiting for ransom, and a monarch dreaming of new lands to tax. The Byzantine Emperor Basil II knew this better than anyone. For nearly 50 years, he turned conquest into a business. He didn't waste his fortune on luxury or parades. Instead, he invested in what truly mattered: soldiers, fortresses, and discipline. When he died in 1025, his treasury overflowed with gold, enough to keep his empire stable for decades. His wealth was not admired, it was feared. It was the kind of fortune that reminded other rulers what war could buy. Across Europe, kings learned that victory had a price tag and defeat an invoice. To fight a war, they raised taxes that crushed peasants and merchants alike. Even holy wars, crusades for God's will, were often campaigns for territory, trade routes, and plunder. When Jerusalem was taken in 1099, it wasn't heaven that shone in the eyes of the Crusaders. It was the glitter of loot and gold. And yet, the blood that made kings rich rarely belonged to them. For the nobles beneath the crown, war was both duty and investment. Every battle offered the promise of spoils, seized lands, captured prisoners, and ransom money. A single noble hostage could be worth more than a year's harvest. When the French king John II was captured at Poitiers in 1356, his ransom reached an astronomical 3 million écus, a sum that could buy a small kingdom. Knights, too, learned that valor paid dividends. They fought under banners not just for honor, but for profit. A knight's sword could win him estates, titles, or simply the right to strip a corpse of its armor. Many of them treated warfare as a brutal career path. The ones who survived long enough became landlords, collecting rents from peasants who in turn paid for the wars that had enslaved them. The cycle was perfect. The crown taxed the people to fund wars. Wars expanded the crown's land and power. That power raised new taxes, and once again the peasants bled to fill royal coffers. For those born into privilege, wealth was inherited. For those born into poverty, wealth could only be stolen, seized, or won in the chaos of war. Medieval greed was not hidden behind walls of marble or gold. It was painted on battlefields, etched in the screams of men who died making someone else rich. By the 14th century, the line between soldier and thief had blurred beyond recognition. Mercenaries roamed Europe, selling their swords to the highest bidder, burning villages and cities that refused to pay. They were soldiers without kings, proof that loyalty was just another commodity. In the end, the kingdoms of the Middle Ages were not built on divine right or noble blood. They were built on a currency more ancient than gold, the will to kill for it. If war built the kingdoms of men, faith built the empire of God, and that empire was rich beyond imagination. In the Middle Ages, the church was everywhere. It stood above kings, owned more land than any monarch, and collected more money than any merchant. Its cathedrals rose like stone mountains over starving towns, reminders that heaven was not free, and neither was forgiveness. From the moment a medieval child was born, the church's hand was already at work. You paid to be baptized, paid to be married, and paid again to be buried. The journey between cradle and grave was an endless toll road lined with priests, relics, and indulgences, each one promising a shortcut to paradise for the right price. For the peasants, it was terrifying and sacred all at once. They were taught that sin could damn them forever, but a donation, even a small one, could open the gates of heaven. And so they gave what they didn't have: chickens, grain, coins. Entire harvests were offered in exchange for a priest's blessing. The church called it charity, but charity made the church rich. By the 14th century, abbeys and monasteries had become economic machines. The Benedictines of Glastonbury and Westminster earned thousands of pounds yearly, fortunes equal to noble estates. They owned mills, bakeries, breweries, and entire villages. The monks prayed by day, but by night they counted coins by candlelight, managing farms, collecting rents, and trading goods like businessmen in robes. Even relics, the bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, vials of holy blood, became products. Pilgrims traveled from across Europe to see them, leaving donations in their wake. A church with a famous relic could transform a sleepy town into a booming center of trade. It was faith tourism before tourism even existed, but not all relics were divine. Behind the veil of incense and Latin chants, an entire market of forgeries thrived. There were enough fragments of the true cross being sold to build a ship, and every monastery, it seemed, had at least one finger of St. Peter. Salvation had a price tag, and the church was the only seller. Those within its ranks knew the game. Ambitious men joined monasteries not just to serve God, but to climb the ladder of influence. A clever priest could rise to abbot, bishop, even cardinal, titles that came with land, servants, and enormous incomes. In England, a wealthy bishop might earn as much as an earl, while the Pope in Rome commanded riches that rivaled empires. One story tells of Thomas Wolsey, son of a humble butcher, who rose to become cardinal and Lord Chancellor under Henry VIII. His fortune was so vast that he spent the modern equivalent of $25 million refurbishing Hampton Court Palace. A servant of God, yes, but one who lived like a king. And yet perhaps the most ingenious invention of all was the indulgence, the church's ultimate product. Why wait for heaven when you could buy your way there now? With a few coins, a sinner could erase a lifetime of guilt. The promise was simple. The poor gave their bread for hope, and the rich gave their gold for absolution. For centuries, it worked flawlessly. Gold poured into cathedrals, bishops lived like lords, and Rome gleamed with marble paid for by fear. The medieval world was built on faith, but faith was built on business. Every candle lit for a soul, every bell rung for the dead, every prayer whispered for mercy. They all had one thing in common: someone paid for them. If gold was scarce in the Middle Ages, flesh was not. The human body, its pain, its pleasure, its decay, became a marketplace of its own. In towns and cities, men sold their strength. Women sold what little power they had left. And between the two stood the church, the physicians and the traders, each claiming a share of the human body's worth. Medicine, for most, was not a science. It was a gamble. The doctor's tools were knives, leeches, and superstition. A surgeon might bleed a patient to balance the humors, drill a skull to release demons, or smear mercury on wounds to drive away disease. It was a brutal art, and the line between healer and executioner was thin, but there was money in suffering. A good surgeon, or barber surgeon, could earn more than most craftsmen. The wealthy paid for treatments that promised miracles. The poor paid with their lives. Hospitals, founded by monasteries, doubled as businesses, funded by donations, wills and indulgences sold to ease the guilt of the dying. Then there were the apothecaries, part chemist, part alchemist, part con artist. They sold potions brewed from herbs, ashes and animal organs, claiming to cure everything from plague to heartbreak. The most expensive remedies often came from the rarest ingredients, unicorn horn, powdered mummy, or bezoar stones taken from the stomachs of goats. Many were fakes. But when you were dying of fever, any lie that offered hope was worth a coin. Flesh was also currency in the oldest trade of all. Prostitution was not only tolerated, but regulated. Every city had its red streets, often under the watchful eyes of local officials or even priests. The church condemned lust from the pulpit, yet quietly collected taxes from brothels. Better they sin with coin, one cleric wrote, than sin with chaos. For some women it was survival, for others it was strategy. Courtesans in the great cities, Venice, Paris, Florence, became wealthy, influential, even educated. They dealt not only in pleasure but in information, selling secrets to merchants and nobles alike. Their homes glittered with silk and candlelight, a parody of the palaces that forbade them entry. But the trade in flesh reached darker corners still. The market for relics, human bones, saints' skulls, dried hearts, turned death into luxury. Monks traveled the continent to discover holy remains, digging up ancient graves and claiming miracles. Pilgrims would pay fortunes to touch a finger bone that supposedly belonged to a martyr. Entire cathedrals were built to house them, their foundations resting, literally, on the dead. Even execution had an economy. Hangmen and torturers were paid well for their craft. So were gravediggers and body collectors during the plagues. When the Black Death swept through Europe, entire towns hired corpsemen to haul the dead away for a handful of coins. And yet, in that darkness, new industries were born. The demand for death gave rise to burial guilds, coffin makers, candle sellers, and stone carvers, all profiting from grief. In a world obsessed with the soul, the body never stopped paying. It was the worker, the offering, the product, and the profit, all in one. Every drop of blood spilled in the name of healing, every kiss bought in the name of pleasure, every bone sold in the name of faith. They all told the same story, that in the Middle Ages, the only thing cheaper than life was dignity. While kings spilled blood and priests sold salvation, another kind of fortune was quietly taking shape, one that didn't rely on noble birth or divine favor. It began not on battlefields or altars, but in the noise of crowded markets, where voices shouted in a dozen tongues, and the air smelled of salt, sweat, and spice. The merchants were coming. For centuries, the medieval world had been ruled by the sword and the cross, but now trade began to change everything. In the ports of Venice and Genoa, ships returned from the east loaded with treasures the peasants couldn't even imagine. Silk from China, spices from India, gold from Africa. Every voyage brought not just goods but power. Whoever controlled trade controlled destiny. The merchant class was born out of hunger. Hunger for movement, for profit, for freedom from the chains of feudal lords. They were neither knights nor peasants, neither holy nor damned. They were something new, the middlemen between worlds. They bought cheap, sold dear, and watched the old world of kings and priests depend on them more each year. But it wasn't just markets that made them rich. It was risk. Every journey across the sea was a gamble with death, storms, pirates, disease. Some ships vanished forever beneath the waves. Others returned carrying enough wealth to change a family's fate for generations. The sea was cruel, but it was fair. It rewarded courage and punished weakness, unlike the courts of kings. From the trade routes of the Mediterranean to the markets of Bruges, Paris, and London, a new kind of power was forming. One based not on blood, but on numbers. The ledger replaced the sword. The signature replaced the blessing. And gold, once guarded by the church, began to move freely through human hands. Guilds arose, powerful brotherhoods of craftsmen, weavers, smiths, and merchants who controlled prices, quality, and secrets. Within their ranks, a man could rise by skill alone. A poor apprentice could become a master, his name etched above his shop door. But the guilds were ruthless. They protected their own and crushed competition. A merchant who broke the rules could be ruined, or worse. Yet the richest among them had no use for workshops. They dealt not in things, but in promises, credit, loans, and interest, the invisible trade that would one day rule the world. The Italians were the masters. The Medici family of Florence turned wool into gold and gold into power. By the 15th century, their banks stretched across Europe, from London to Rome to Geneva. Behind their ledgers hid secrets of kings and popes. The Medici didn't just lend money, they lent silence, influence, and control. In the north, men like Francesco d'Attini, once a simple trader's apprentice, became living symbols of ambition. He started by selling cloth and weapons during wartime, then moved into art, jewelry, and finance. By the end of his life, he had built a web of trade so vast that it connected cities across continents. He began poor and died surrounded by gold. In a world where most people never left their village, d'Attini had conquered half the known world. With ink and parchment, the merchants' rise changed everything. The church needed them. The nobles borrowed from them. Even kings bowed their heads when they needed ships or credit. Gold no longer served the throne or the altar, it served itself, and so the markets became the new cathedrals of greed. The ringing of coins replaced the bells of prayer, and the merchants, dressed in silk instead of armor, became the quiet emperors of a new kind of empire, one without borders, banners, or mercy. By the late Middle Ages, greed had evolved. The sword could conquer, the church could command, and the merchants could count. But now a new breed of fortune seekers emerged. They didn't fight wars or collect tithes. They hunted secrets. They were scholars, monks, magicians, dreamers, the alchemists of greed. In candlelit rooms thick with smoke and whispers, they tried to do what kings and popes never could, create gold itself. Alchemy promised more than riches. It promised godhood. To turn lead into gold was to rewrite creation, to steal the power of the divine. And for centuries, some believed it could be done. Libraries filled with coded manuscripts, diagrams of impossible machines, and recipes that mixed science with madness. Every generation had its prophets, men who claimed to be on the edge of discovery, always one secret ingredient away from eternal wealth. Kings financed them. Nobles protected them, because even the powerful were greedy for miracles. Some of the greatest minds of the age, like Albertus Magnus and Roger Bacon, flirted with the forbidden science. They called it philosophy, but in truth it was the most dangerous business of all, selling hope to the desperate. But not every alchemist worked with fire and glass. Some dealt in words, illusions, and lies. The copyists and scribes who filled the monasteries learned that knowledge itself had a price. A single illuminated manuscript could take years to make, painted with gold leaf and crushed gemstones. For those who controlled books, information became a form of treasure. Kings waged wars for scrolls and relics of wisdom. Scholars risked excommunication to steal ideas from forbidden texts. And where there was knowledge, there was fraud. Falsified chronicles, counterfeit documents granting fake lands or noble titles, forgeries so perfect that even popes were deceived. The pen, sharper than any sword, became a weapon of wealth. Then came the astrologers, the sky merchants. They sold predictions to the powerful, charging fortunes to read the stars and the fates of kingdoms. One wrong prophecy could get them burned. One right one could make them legends. From royal courts to village fairs, people lined up to pay for visions of their future. The line between wisdom and witchcraft vanished beneath the weight of coins. Even artists joined the game. Painters, sculptors, and architects learned that beauty could buy influence. Cathedrals glittered with stained glass and gold, not out of devotion, but competition. Each bishop wanted his church to be holier and richer looking than the next. Art became currency. Faith became spectacle. The age of miracles had turned into an age of marketing, but perhaps the purest form of intellectual greed was the illusion of eternity. In secret chambers, men sought not only to turn metals into gold, but flesh into immortality. They searched for the elixir of life, the philosopher's stone that would make them deathless and divine. Some drank mercury, others mixed blood with wine, convinced they could trap the soul in matter. They failed, always, but each failure cost someone a fortune. The irony was cruel. The closer they came to gold, the more they destroyed themselves. Many died poisoned by their own experiments. Others were executed as heretics or magicians. The few who survived sold their knowledge to the highest bidder, trading mystery for money, faith for fame, and yet their dream endured. Every century, someone new appeared claiming to hold the secret, because greed, like gold, never rusts. It only changes shape, from sword to coin to idea. Every fortune has a shadow, and in the Middle Ages that shadow grew darker with every coin struck and every prayer sold. The golden age of kings, monks, and merchants glittered on the surface, but beneath it lay something rotten, an empire of greed that fed on its own creation. because no matter how much gold a man gathered, he could never buy peace. By the 14th century, Europe was drowning in wealth and hunger at the same time. The castles were taller, the cathedrals grander, the markets louder, and yet the people were starving. The same coins that built cities were minted from the misery of thousands. Every church bell that rang for the glory of God also echoed the cries of those who paid for it. Even the great families who ruled this world of gold found that fortune had a curse. Debts grew faster than kingdoms. Merchants who once lent to kings found themselves crushed beneath royal greed. The Templars learned this lesson the hardest way. They were warriors of faith, holy bankers trusted by popes and princes alike. For years they financed crusades, held treasures, and invented modern banking long before its time. But their wealth became their death sentence. King Philip IV of France, drowning in debt, saw their fortune and wanted it for himself. In 1307, he accused the Templars of heresy, idolatry, and unspeakable crimes. Hundreds were arrested, tortured, and burned alive. Their leader, Jacques de Molay, was executed at dawn, cursing the king and pope as the flames consumed him. Within a year, both men were dead, and a legend was born. The Templar gold was said to be cursed, its owners doomed to ruin. But that curse was never limited to kings. It haunted everyone who touched the coin, from peasants dreaming of freedom to nobles drowning in luxury. Money promised salvation, but delivered corruption. It divided families, turned allies into enemies, and sanctuaries into marketplaces. Even the church, once untouchable, began to decay under its own wealth. Papal palaces dripped with marble and silk, while the faithful starved outside the gates. When the Black Death swept through Europe, killing millions, many saw it as divine punishment, not for lust or violence, but for greed. The plague spared no one, rich, poor, holy, or damned. It leveled the world like an invisible war. And yet, even in death, men tried to keep their gold. They buried it with them, hid it beneath floorboards, sealed it in tombs guarded by curses. Because deep down, they believed what the priests never dared to say, that heaven could not be trusted to pay interest. Far from Europe, in the sands of Africa, another man learned the same truth. Mansa Musa, emperor of Mali, ruled over the richest land on earth, his coffers overflowing with gold from the mines of West Africa. When he journeyed to Mecca in 1324, he carried so much treasure that he flooded Cairo's markets and collapsed its economy for years. He gave until gold lost its meaning and left behind a legend so vast that no one could tell where fact ended and myth began. But even Mansa Musa's wealth vanished with time. Empires rose, empires fell, coins rusted, and names were forgotten. Only the curse remained, the curse of wanting more. Because that was the true lesson of the Middle Ages. Gold could build cathedrals and conquer continents, but it could never fill the emptiness it created. Every coin was a prayer unanswered. Every fortune was a wound that never healed. And the more they tried to possess gold, the more gold possessed them. The Middle Ages are long gone, and the kings are dust, the monks are bones, the gold is buried. But the hunger that built their world never died. It changed names, changed faces, changed weapons, yet it remains the same. Every age believes it has mastered greed. Every civilization thinks its wealth will last forever. But history whispers another truth, that every empire built on gold eventually bleeds it dry. The peasants who prayed for bread, the merchants who weighed their fortunes, the kings who counted the spoils of war, they all chased the same ghost. And in the end, it was the ghost who won. If you enjoyed this dark journey through the hidden economy of the Middle Ages, give this video a like, subscribe to Medieval Crazy History, and tell us in the comments which medieval mystery you'd like to uncover next. Because history isn't written by the victors, it's remembered by the survivors, and their whispers still echo through every cursed coin that was ever spent.